Magnus Carlsen got very angry during this game. He was shaking his head, slamming the desk, really animated on camera, and Wesley So was sat literally opposite him, so must have picked up on this. Now, they were playing against each other online, but sat across the table. It's this kind of hybrid online over the board format which they do in the Champions Chess Tour, and this is the finals of the whole event. Carlsen's already won the tour, but there's still a lot of prize money up for grabs, and of course the kudos and prestige of beating the other players. Now, this was the fourth game in the mini match between Magnus and Wesley. Magnus was 2-1 up in the match, so he just needs to draw this game with the black pieces, but Wesley really brings the heat and Magnus blunders, but that wasn't the end of the story. So Wesley kicks off with e4. We had e5 from Magnus, and now Wesley goes for this Italian game with bishop to c4, knight f6 from Magnus, d3 played, and now Magnus brings the bishop to c5, coming outside of the pawn chain. Castles was played, and then pawn to d6. Now we see c3 from Wesley, standard idea to support d4, maybe even b4 in certain positions. And now a5 from Magnus, he shuts the door on any b4 expansion and gives his bishop some room to retreat back here. Rook e1 now played, castles from black, and now pawn h3 takes away this important g4 square. This knight's an important defender of d4, you don't want it getting pinned. And now bishop e6 was played, developing of course, and black doesn't mind if white trades here, because after the pawn recaptures, although you've now got doubled pawns, this one actually opens the f-file and also covers these key squares. d5 is a very standard idea for black, for example, in future, so it just supports all of that stuff. Not the most ambitious way for white to play. So bishop b5 played, very standard move for these top GMs. You keep pieces on the board, you put some pressure on that knight. And now bishop a7, Magnus tucks back, anticipates d4. That's what Wesley duly does. And now bishop d7 was played. d5 is a threat to actually fork those pieces, and you don't want to take here too prematurely. You give white the big center, and now this knight can develop to c3, which is a more advantageous square. So instead we had the bishop dropping to d7. Yes, you lose the tempo, but white spent an extra tempo too. Now bishop a4, and by the way, this is a moment to note here, bishop a4 is not the most obvious move. These pieces need developing, right? Minor pieces should be developed into the game. But the thing is, you don't yet know which squares you want to put them on. This knight's holding back to come to c3 in case black takes. And does this bishop want to come to g5 and get chased around? Maybe with h6, g5. If it comes to e3, it blocks the rook. So this is the kind of cat and mouse stuff. These positions, they're so rich. Rook e8 now from Magnus, I was about to say Wesley, Magnus. And now here we see the bishop tucking back to c2, so it covers e4. Now you've got two defenders because black's got two attackers, and so there was a threat to take on d4 and then win a pawn. And now Magnus has got an idea to take here after pawn recaptures, go knight b4 going after this bishop. But first he goes h6, important move because you don't want bishop g5 coming in some of those variations. Very subtle. But now Wesley takes some time to go a4, and this is a slightly improved version for black with h6, a4 inserted. Now when Magnus captures and plants the knight on b4, well, after this whole sequence of knight to c3, so defending this pawn, you couldn't save the bishop, by the way, because then the pawn would drop. Well, then after all of these ones come off, here Magnus can now play pawn to c6. He doesn't have to spend time playing h6 if he'd played this too soon. So that's what he does. Good move, flexible move, supports d5, b5, opens the queen's scope here. And now rook e2 by Wesley, another weird kind of move to understand, but again he's just delaying the development of this bishop. I mean, bishop f4 looks so natural hitting this pawn, but after pawn to d5, well, do you want the bishop on that square? Say you close things with e5, well, now maybe you'd rather bring it to e3 in one go, preventing this c5 push immediately from black. And if you take, well, now the knight could pick up a tempo kind of thing, so it's very subtle. That's why rook e2, just waiting to see if black goes d5. But Magnus now goes b5, different move, different change of plan. And a good move as well, gains that space, threatens to go b4, kick this knight, which is defending the pawn. And so that's why Wesley now pushes on with pawn to e5. Excuse me. So now the pawn captures on e5. Here we had recaptures from Wesley. And the knight gets kicked back to h7 here. Looks a bit passive, but that knight does have a route back into the game. It can come to g5 or back to f8 and into e6 or g6. So you've always got to look at those knight journeys, how they can get recycled. Bishop e3 from Wesley. And now because these bishops come off, really standard idea by Wesley, by the way, to trade off one of those bishops when your opponent's got the bishop pair. Well, now the bishops are gone, the knight can come to g5. So we had captures played by Wesley, the queen recaptured, Wesley doubles the rooks, and now Magnus was critical of this next move. He felt like he was trying to force the equalisation of the game here, even though actually things were basically already equalised. So he could have gone something like rook a to d8 or pushed on with b4, but he instead goes bishop to c6. Now he is threatening mate in 1, Wesley blocks with knight to e4, and here Magnus realised he should have just taken this knight off the board. He said he didn't want to give Wesley this extra time to bring a piece more centralised, but actually this is still an equal position and should be more than holdable towards a draw. This was the way to play. But after knight to e4 here, Magnus completely blundered. He played queen to g6. Not an obvious blunder. So if you want to pause here and look for the move which Wesley played, then please do so. So here Wesley played knight to f6. Fantastic move, checking the king and then threatening to pick up the rook on the next turn. So you really have to take that knight or you're just completely lost. And this is the trick, that now you've got this rook g3 idea. You've opened the g file, you can win the queen with the skewer. But was that the best way to play? Well, no, it actually wasn't, but it's how Wesley played. Now, what he should have done here is take this bishop on c6. Now, although it looks like you're actually just letting black back into the game, materials level, actually, this is an old variation I did. If you take the pawn, that's bad because then rook g3 comes. Well, king h8 is the best move here. You actually get the king off the file. But like I was saying, although it looks like you're letting black back into the game, the problem is you can push on with e6 or you can take on f6, different moves. But just to show you the theme here, that one comes across, defends this pawn. The theme is that you've got all of these split pawns here for black. You've got a completely exposed king and the white pieces are just swarming all over. It's positionally lost. This is a sample line, you even go a pawn up. So these were the big problems for black. If you just take off the minor pieces, play the heavy piece endgame. But Wesley didn't go for this and he knew he should have done afterwards. Instead, he went rook to g3. So he does win the queen, yes. The pawn recaptures. But now Magnus has a glimmer of hope after rook to e6, defending the bishop. He's going to try and set up a fortress. And he famously once said, there's no such thing as a fortress. Kind of alluding to the fact that very often these can be broken down. So okay, can he hold on? Queen f5 was now played. And now we had takes on e5, the rook recaptured, and after this one doubled, Wesley threw in the check. So it does allow Magnus to block, pick up a tempo against the queen, but now we see these rooks coming off, that's check, the bishop has to recapture, the queen slides away. So pawn a4 now played. Now the key thing to note here when trying to break down a position such as this is that you have to use the pawns to start inducing new weaknesses around the king. It's all about getting at that king when you've got the queen and then some loose pieces which you're trying to pick off. So g4 played, bishop back to c6, king f2, rook e6. Magnus is looking to shuffle here, of course, so Wesley wants to disturb that. Queen d2, king g7, and now g5 starts to try and open lines against the king. So Magnus goes h5, trying to keep things closed. And now here Wesley makes a bad blunder. So he goes king to g3. But the key idea that he needs to fight against is bishop e4 to g6. Once it lands there, it really cements everything. So there are different ways to do this, but one sample line is queen to d1. Now you hit this pawn. So if bishop e4, well, we take, and you can see white's starting to get in around the king, especially if the queen moves, the h-pawn could be coming. So say you go king g6, very logical move to defend this pawn. Well, now, of course, the bishop can't sit there, so you're sort of disturbing the coordination. And if you go h4 to cement this pawn, well, what to do for black? Say you wait with bishop e4, very logical. Then there's this nice g4 idea, threatening to take with check, so you'd have to capture, queen takes. Again, you're rolling your pawns, you're getting through to the king, giving checks. And white's still quite ahead in these variations. But after king g3, well, now bishop e4, this is the problem. Really astute from Magnus, because although you give up on this queen side b pawn, you glue everything together here, and the problem now for white is that whenever you pick up the a pawn, the b pawn is vulnerable, and without those pawns over here, it's very tough to make progress on the king side. So we had rook e3 check, king h2, rook e4 back, holds the a pawn, and now we see some shuffly moves, and the long story short here, and this is where we have the a pawn one, is that you can never actually win that a pawn and still hold on to the b pawn without going through all the different lines. You know, that's the key. g4 now played, so the real battleground is now on that king side. Can Wesley open new lines of attack for his queen rather? So g4. Now the really interesting thing here when I'm clicking is black can actually play any move here and it should technically be a draw. So you can take, you could make a rook move to just ignore that threat and allow white to take, or you can do as Magnus does and push, and this is a really nice idea because now we have queen to d1, threatening queen e1, winning that pawn, but rook a2 comes because you want to check here along the third, but you can't come to b3, queen covers. So rook a2, queen e1, check, king goes, rook g3 check. And this is the idea that you defend the pawn like this by blocking the queen's line, and if the queen captures, well, this is just a draw and endgame. I mean, I'll just click literally a few more moves here to give you an idea. Eventually when you get here, well, at some point you have to initiate this push, and then you get something like this, and okay, it's just dead drawn, you can't do anything there. So taking on g3, no good. The king had to go, and now we basically see an absolute ton of shuffle, and the game ends in a draw because you just cannot break through. The rook just slides, going nowhere. The bishop's cemented, the pawns can't move, and the king can always shuffle. So these were the final moves. We go for about 70 moves. Here a draw was agreed after king to g7. So Magnus holds on, wins the mini match. If you want to see an awesome game played by Hans Niemann against Magnus Carlsen, then check out the video on screen, and do hit that subscribe button if you never want to see a future video, miss a future video. That would be the better one. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.